My name is Novella Grayson. I'm 30 years old. And this is the story of how my parents stole my entire life savings, and how I took them to court and made them pay. I learned to stay silent before I learned to write. In our beige, symmetrical house on the edge of Connecticut, everything looked perfect from the outside. The curtains hung straight. The lawn was always trimmed. The air always smelled faintly of lemon-scented furniture polish. But beneath the polished exterior, everything felt tight. Like you had to hold your breath to belong. I was raised by Helen and Mark Grayson, two people obsessed with control, appearances, and silence. My mother, a marketing director for a high-end fashion retailer, treated me like one of her displays, something to be groomed, dressed up, but never listened to. My father, a financial advisor with a reputation for managing six-figure portfolios, handled everything, especially our lives, like a ledger entry. You didn't ask questions in our house. You followed protocols. You wore beige or navy. You smiled when guests came. And you never, ever, talked back. I wasn't rebellious. I just had thoughts. And in our house, that was enough to be punished. I remember when I was 11, I wore a red hoodie to school, my favorite one, with worn cuffs and a slightly crooked zipper. My mom looked at me with a disgusted expression and said, "Red? With your skin? You look like a swollen tomato." I didn't say anything. I just went upstairs. The next day, the hoodie was gone. No words. No explanation. Just vanished. Like anything I liked too much had to be erased. But the most insidious part of it all wasn't the coldness. It was the favoritism. Landon, my younger brother, could do no wrong. For years younger, louder, sloppier, and meaner in subtle ways. But in my parents' eyes, he was a genius. A golden child. A project with unlimited budget and unlimited chances. When he crashed the garage door at 17 trying to reverse the car, my dad just shook his head and muttered, "Boys need to learn." When I got a B+ in trigonometry, I was grounded for a month with no phone. Landon changed majors 3 times. I was told I needed to find stability and stop chasing fairy tales after taking a summer coding class. That summer, I stopped asking for things. I got my first job at 16, dishwashing at a coffee shop. I told them I had tutoring. I hid my tips inside an old book, carved out the pages and stuffed the bills in there like secrets. By 18, I left home and never looked back. They thought I'd be back in 6 months. My father even said it, "You'll crawl back when the world punches you in the teeth." But I didn't. I lived with 3 roommates in a peeling, creaky apartment in South Philly. We took turns cooking meals, split electricity bills, and used space heaters when the central heating failed. I studied by lamplight and worked every shift I could find. I took jobs most people avoided, late-night content editing, tutoring middle schoolers who threw pencils at me, even writing SEO for a shady vitamin company that promised to restore gut balance. It wasn't glamorous. But I saved. Bit by bit. Dollar by dollar. I built a spreadsheet, color-coded, formula-driven, detailed to the last cent. And over 10 years, through skipped vacations, reheated lentils, and second-hand clothes, I saved nearly $350,000. My plan was simple: buy a modest home by 30. Something small, with a backyard and peace. A place where I could read, decode, and breathe without anyone watching. Without anyone tracking my every move. But I underestimated just how far my parents would go to keep control. It started subtly. The way my laptop began freezing after visiting them for dinner. How some of my logins took slightly longer to load. How an old contact form from my freelance site received spam attempts linked to an untraceable IP. Then came the moment that changed everything. I logged into my bank account one night in late autumn, just after I'd decided to buy a house with my partner, Natalie. She was the first person I trusted enough to talk about my past. She was kind, wicked smart, and a cybersecurity engineer. We were finally ready to find a place together. We'd even toured a little blue-shuttered Cape Cod with a porch swing. But that night, something on the login screen stopped me cold. A message. New device login, 1:04 p.m. Bucks County, PA. I was nowhere near Bucks County. And only one person I knew lived there. My father. At first, I thought maybe it was a fluke. A bank glitch. I double-checked the IP. Not mine. I called the bank immediately. Yes, ma'am, we did detect an attempted login. There were also questions about international wire transfers. No transactions processed, yet. My stomach dropped. I hung up and ran to Natalie, who didn't ask questions, just opened my laptop and began typing. Within minutes, she found the spyware. It was hidden in a terminal process. Recording keystrokes. Screenshots every 30 seconds. Uploading them to a remote server. GraysonInvest.net. My father's old domain. And when we finally opened the clean device and checked my savings balance. $0. They took it all. Not half. Not a portion. Every cent I had worked for since I was a teenager. Transferred, signed, moved to an account in my father's name. My world stopped spinning. My breath stilled. For the first time in a decade, I felt like I was back in that house again, furniture in a silent room. Natalie reached for my hand. You okay? I nodded. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what I was. Angry? Betrayed? Shattered? No. I was done. Done hiding. Done waiting. Done being afraid of their rules and their grip. That night, I decided. They were going to regret ever underestimating me. We didn't sleep that night. Natalie stayed up with me, cross-checking every transaction, digging through the server logs, and backing up my entire drive to an encrypted external. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the blinking cursor on my bank dashboard like it had personally betrayed me. At 2:17 a.m., we confirmed it beyond doubt. The spyware had been installed exactly 3 months earlier, on the night my father offered to clean up my laptop after dinner, saying it was running slow. I remembered sitting on the couch, sipping tea with my mother while he sat in the kitchen with my computer. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? It was my father. That night, he didn't just tinker with files. He invaded every inch of my life. Natalie looked at me across the glow of 2 monitors. We need to go to the bank in person. At 8 a.m. sharp, we were in the lobby of my credit union, speaking to a branch manager named Tasha, who had the no-nonsense voice of someone who'd seen too many fraud cases. When she saw the documents, the spyware logs, and the fact that the money had gone into a personal account under the name Mark E. Grayson, she exhaled slowly and said, "This isn't just fraud. This is theft, impersonation, and digital intrusion." I signed the complaint paperwork. The bank's fraud department launched an internal investigation and advised I contact a civil attorney. Natalie already had someone in mind, Miranda Kessler. She was a specialist in data privacy violations and financial abuse within families. When we met her, she wore a charcoal blazer and had this rare calmness that made you feel like justice wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Miranda listened quietly as I laid everything out. The spyware. The stolen money. The false bank identity. The fact that my father had likely impersonated me over the phone using information he'd stolen from my own files. When I finished, she leaned forward, hands clasped. I'll take the case. That night, I called my parents. Not to negotiate. Not to cry. Just to confirm what I already knew. My mother answered, her voice falsely chipper. Hello, sweetheart. You transferred $354,000 out of my account. There was a pause, long, loaded. Then her voice softened. You don't understand, your father only did what he thought was best. By stealing it? She sighed. You're our daughter. That money was never just yours. Your father wanted to protect you from making reckless decisions. The words hit me like a slap. Not because they were cruel, but because they were familiar. That tone. That manipulation. That quiet gaslighting wrapped in feigned concern. I ended the call with one sentence, "You'll be served by the end of the week." When I hung up, I felt something shift in my chest. Not closure. Not even justice. Just space. Like I'd finally pushed a heavy piece of furniture off my lungs. The legal process began swiftly. Miranda filed a formal lawsuit in Montgomery County, listing 4 claims: theft, financial fraud, invasion of privacy, and unauthorized access to electronic systems. We included screenshots, forensic spyware analysis, my transaction records, and a detailed timeline. And then we filed a motion to freeze the receiving account, the one in my father's name, before he could transfer the remaining funds elsewhere. 2 weeks later, I received a thick envelope via certified mail. It was a counterclaim from their lawyer, Maxwell Rourke, a high-profile corporate attorney known for spinning financial misconduct into family miscommunication. The document read like a drama script. Their claim? That my father had reclaimed funds owed to him for the unpaid financial and personal support he provided me between the ages of 18 and 23. That the funds were repayment under a verbal agreement made between parties. I wanted to laugh. Verbal agreement? Between the father who told me money isn't your business and the daughter he hadn't spoken to in 3 years without condescension? It was ridiculous. But it was also dangerous. Because courts, especially in cases involving family, can be swayed by narratives. Emotional manipulation. Appearances. Miranda, however, was unfazed. "We'll beat this," she said. "But we need witnesses." That's when I made the call I'd been dreading. Landon. I hadn't told him anything yet. He still lived in New Haven, renting a studio while attending grad school. He wasn't close to them anymore, not since my parents threatened to cut him off for switching majors to sociology. But I wasn't sure where he stood with me. When he answered, I just said, "I need your help." They took my money. They installed spyware on my computer. Silence. Then, "When do you want to meet?" The next day, Landon came to our apartment. He looked tired, older somehow. But when I showed him the bank statement, he clenched his jaw. I thought they were weird about money, but this... He took a deep breath, then pulled out his phone. "I've got texts. From Mom. She offered me $50,000 if I stayed quiet and didn't get involved." My stomach dropped. He forwarded the messages to Miranda that night. Screenshots, emails, even a voice memo. One clip, only 7 seconds long, had my mother saying, "Your sister's always been stubborn. But if she doesn't know how to manage what she's given, we'll have to guide her, by any means." It was damning. 3 days later, Miranda filed an updated motion to include intentional coercion and financial manipulation of dependents. The court accepted it. And the hearing date was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, we received a settlement offer from my parents' attorney. $350,000 returned, plus $10,000 for emotional distress, in exchange for me dropping the case and signing a non-disclosure agreement. I didn't even blink. "No." Miranda nodded. "You sure?" "I don't want silence. I want truth. And I want consequences." That weekend, I drove to Bucks County. Not to talk. Not to negotiate. Just to look them in the eye. When I stood on that porch, my father opened the door with the same casual arrogance as always, sipping from a glass of whiskey. "You won't win," he said calmly. I stared at him. "You already lost." And then I walked away. Because I wasn't there for his reaction. I was there to make a statement. That I wasn't their pawn anymore. That the ledger they used to track me couldn't calculate dignity. That I wasn't afraid of them. Not anymore. The courthouse looked smaller than I expected. Maybe because I had imagined this day for so long in my mind, it always seemed massive, this towering institution where everything I'd endured would finally be seen, where my voice would be undeniable. But when we pulled into the parking lot that morning, the building just looked average. Glass doors. Gray steps. Like any other office. But inside those walls, my entire life was about to be put on display. I clutched the binder we'd assembled, neatly divided tabs, bank statements, spyware logs, device forensics, witness testimony. Landon walked beside me, his face pale but focused. Natalie was behind us, quiet, but her hand never left my back. And Miranda walked in front, her stride purposeful, confident, like she'd done this dance 100 times. Judge Geraldine Moore presided, stern, mid-60s, known for being tough on privacy violations. That was good. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted someone who understood the law didn't stop at the front door of a family home. The court clerk read the case summary aloud. Plaintiff, Novella Grayson. Defendants, Mark and Helen Grayson. Rourke, my parents' lawyer, began with what sounded like a bedtime story. This is not a case of fraud, he said smoothly. It's a case of miscommunication within a family. My clients acted with concern. With love. Perhaps too much love. I felt bile rise in my throat. He went on, painting my father as a stern but caring parent, and my mother as a misunderstood matriarch trying to hold the family together. He described me as ambitious but emotionally distant, a daughter who cut off contact and rejected support. His words were slick, rehearsed. But Miranda didn't flinch. When it was her turn, she stood slowly and addressed the court with absolute clarity. This isn't about family conflict, she said. It's about theft. About digital surveillance. About control. And about one woman's fundamental right to own the life she built, without intrusion or manipulation. Then she called Landon to the stand. He adjusted his tie nervously but spoke with remarkable composure. I never asked for the money. My parents said Sophia was unstable, that she needed intervention. But I never believed that. She's the most disciplined person I know. Rourke tried to twist him. Did you benefit from your parents' financial support in the past? Landon didn't flinch. Yes. And I'm ashamed of how much I ignored because of it. Then he dropped the bombshell. They offered me money to stay quiet. $50,000. I have the texts. The courtroom stirred. The judge raised her eyebrows, then signaled to the clerk. Please enter Exhibit D4 into the record. When it was my turn to take the stand, I was already bracing for war. Rourke was ready. Miss Grayson, is it true you moved out at 18 and cut off contact with your family? No, I said calmly. I distanced myself. I needed space. But I sent holiday cards. I even visited when invited. You claim you built your savings independently. Did your parents ever help you financially during college? No. I worked 2 jobs, applied for scholarships, and paid rent on time. He smiled, as if waiting to pounce. And yet, they say they had a verbal agreement that you'd repay them for the support they offered. I looked directly at the judge. That agreement never happened. What did happen is they stole login credentials, installed spyware, impersonated me, and took $354,000 from my account. I can prove every one of those actions. Miranda showed the court the server logs, the voice match from the bank's hotline, and the IP trail tracing the spyware to my father's domain. She even had a printed map that visualized the data flow from my laptop to their server. The judge leaned forward. You said the spyware recorded your financial activity for 3 months? Yes. And the defendants had access the entire time? Yes. They watched everything I did. Every dollar I earned. Every login. Every message. The judge was silent for a moment. Then she asked, "And what do you want from this court?" I swallowed. My voice was quiet but steady. "I want it back. Not just the money. The right to live without being tracked. To exist without permission. To know that family doesn't mean ownership." There was a long silence. Then Judge Moore said, "I've heard enough." My parents never spoke during the hearing. Not once. My father sat with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. My mother clutched her purse like it was a lifeline, her eyes darting between the judge and the floor. When the verdict was read, I felt my knees go weak, but I didn't fall. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Novella Grayson. The defendants are ordered to return the remaining $39,000 plus $50,000 in damages, legal fees, and emotional restitution. Further, the court grants a permanent injunction prohibiting the defendants from accessing, monitoring, or interfering with the plaintiff's financial records, digital data, or property. It was over. At least on paper. But the most unexpected moment came next. Judge Moore tapped her gavel, then lifted a second file. "This court refers the evidence of electronic surveillance and fraudulent impersonation to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Even Rourke looked rattled. I stood up slowly, every breath feeling like a brand new thing. Natalie took my hand. Miranda whispered, "You did it." And I believed her. But I also knew this wasn't just about justice. It was about finally closing the door on people who had mistaken obedience for love, and silence for weakness. We stepped out of the courthouse into pale sunlight and a cluster of reporters. Microphones extended. Cameras clicked. Questions flew like arrows, all aimed at me. "Novella, what do you say to people who believe this is just a family misunderstanding? Did you really sue your own parents over money? Are you afraid of possible backlash from extended relatives?" I didn't answer. Not one word. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because the people who needed to hear me had already heard. I'd spoken my truth where it mattered, in the courtroom, under oath, on the record. The rest was noise. Miranda fielded a few questions, her voice firm and clear. "This case is not just about family drama. It is a warning that digital privacy, financial independence, and bodily autonomy do not end at your childhood bedroom door. Blood does not equal ownership. And parents do not get to play God with their children's lives." The headlines went viral that same night. "Daughter sues parents after they use spyware to steal $350,000, and wins." A judge just sent a message, "Parents are not above the law." My inbox exploded. Messages came in from strangers, some kind, some cruel. One said, "Thank you for fighting. I've been afraid of my parents tracking me for years." Another sneered, "You'll regret this when you're older. Family is all you have." But the one that hit me hardest was from someone named Emily L., who wrote, "Your story made me change all my passwords tonight. I didn't realize my ex still had access. You might have just saved me." That message? I printed it. Folded it. Taped it to the side of my desk. Because that was the moment I realized, this wasn't just my fight. It was a signal fire. The money was returned within 10 business days. A wire from a frozen Grayson account totaling $39,000. Plus $50,000 for emotional restitution, as the court ordered. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even touch it right away. Instead, I went for a walk. Down the narrow streets of my neighborhood. Past the bodegas, the laundromats, the street corner with the chipped bench where I used to sit with my laptop and $1 coffee to use free Wi-Fi. I breathed. I felt light. Natalie greeted me with a quiet smile when I got home. She had already printed the confirmation receipt and placed it in a folder marked, Justice. We toasted with chamomile tea. She raised her mug. To dignity, she said. And freedom, I replied. That weekend, I received a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was different. Flat, hollow. No performative sweetness. Just a single line, broken by a long silence. What you did, it's torn everything apart. But if that's what it took for you to feel seen, then maybe we deserve it. I didn't call her back. But I saved the message. Not to forgive. But to remember. Because even guilt, when it comes too late, is not absolution. A few days later, I got an email from a journalist, Carter Briggs. He'd been digging into my father's investment firm. His subject line read, "More beneath the surface?" Attached were court documents, whistleblower statements, and internal memos from Grayson and Associates. Turns out my father had been under quiet investigation for over a year. Misappropriation of client funds. False reporting to cover firm losses. 3 pending lawsuits. 2 refinance defaults. That's where the money went. Not to Landon. Not even to protect me. But to keep his empire from collapsing in silence. Carter asked if he could quote me. I declined. But I gave him permission to use my story, anonymously, as the final nail. And nail it he did. The article was titled, "Control, Capital, and Surveillance, When Family Becomes the First Violation." Natalie and I didn't talk much about it. We didn't have to. Instead, we poured our energy into something new. A home. Not just 4 walls, but a space untouched by manipulation, untouched by spyware, untouched by history. We toured listings with modest expectations and quiet hope. One evening, we stepped into a small 2-bedroom on the west side, white siding, sloped porch, maple tree in the front yard. A little crooked. A little worn. But the sunlight pooled just right on the living room floor, and Natalie whispered, "This place already feels honest." We made an offer that same week. When the keys were handed to us at closing, I didn't think of the trial. Or the money. I thought of the girl who used to lie in bed at 16, clutching $5 tips inside a hollowed-out book and dreaming of escape. This was for her. We didn't throw a party. We ordered pizza, laid on the floor, and ate straight from the box while boxes surrounded us. It was perfect. A few days later, Landon visited. He brought a crate of books and a bonsai tree as a housewarming gift. We sat on the porch and talked until the sky darkened. He looked at the peeling paint on the railing and said softly, "I've never felt peace in our family's house. But here? I think you finally found it." I smiled. "No. I built it." He stayed overnight, sleeping on an air mattress. "Before bed," he said, "if you ever speak to them again, I hope it's on your terms. And no one else's." I nodded. That's the only way it'll ever happen. That night, I slept without dreams for the first time in years. I woke up to silence. Not the kind you get in the early morning when the world's just stretching awake, but the deep, still kind that tells you you're exactly where you're meant to be. No creaking floors outside my door. No muffled voices judging me through the walls. No shadow of expectation hanging in the air. Just peace. That morning, Natalie and I brewed coffee in our half-unpacked kitchen, surrounded by boxes labeled kitchen, non-essential, books, and Natalie's tech junk. We drank from mismatched mugs, sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor, and watched the light creep across the windowsill. It wasn't perfect. The paint was chipped in places. The sink dripped slightly if the handle wasn't positioned just right. But it was ours. Uncompromised. Untouched. Later that week, I got an invitation to speak at a cybersecurity conference in Philadelphia. The organizer had read the article Carter Briggs wrote, even though my name wasn't in it. She said, "There's not enough conversation about family-based digital abuse. Would you be willing to share your story? You can be anonymous. I hesitated at first. Telling a room full of strangers what happened wasn't something I had planned for. But Natalie gently touched my hand and said, "Someone out there needs to know it's not just happening to them." So I said yes. The talk was titled, "Targeted by Family, Surveillance from Within." The room was small, maybe 30 people. College students, tech professionals, one woman who looked to be in her 60s holding a notepad with trembling hands. I didn't give them names. I didn't dwell on revenge. I told them what spyware looks like. What behaviors to watch for. What red flags to notice when privacy turns into control. I told them how I traced the access logs. How I secured my accounts. How I fought back. And at the end, I said, sometimes the greatest form of abuse is the one that comes wrapped in love and expectation. You're not selfish for wanting a room of your own, digitally or otherwise. People lined up afterward to talk to me. A teenage girl with a cracked iPhone asked how to tell if her parents were tracking her texts. A woman whispered that her husband made her hand over her passwords just to prove she wasn't hiding anything. I gave them steps. Tools. Resources. But more than that, I gave them permission. Permission to reclaim space they'd been told they didn't deserve. After the conference, I received a follow-up email from Veritask Secure, a growing cybersecurity firm building tech for vulnerable users. They were starting a new division focused on consumer protection from domestic surveillance. They asked if I'd like to consult. 3 weeks later, I accepted the role. It wasn't just a job, it felt like purpose. Every day, I worked with engineers, UX teams, and researchers to design tools for people like me. Like Emily. Like the woman at the conference with the trembling hands. We called the initiative Digital Boundaries. Our first event was hosted in the back room of a public library. 12 attendees. 1 projector. And a bowl of complimentary mints that Natalie insisted on setting out. I taught people how to check device permissions. How to secure their Wi-Fi routers. How to spot fake optimization apps that were really spyware in disguise. It wasn't flashy. But it was real. Tangible. Empowering. Meanwhile, Landon was making his own quiet path. He'd turned down what was left of our parents' support and applied for federal student aid. He took a job as a library assistant and started budgeting like a pro. One evening, he texted me a photo of his new apartment, a cramped studio with peeling linoleum and a broken heater, and wrote, "I've never had less. But I've never felt more in control." I smiled, tears prickling my eyes. Control. That's what it was always about. They didn't take money from me because they needed it. They took it because it let them believe they still owned a piece of me. That I was still a ledger entry. A line in a balance sheet. A figure to be moved for the family. But they were wrong. Some people wondered why I didn't go no contact entirely. Why I didn't block their numbers, erase them from every part of my life. And the truth is, I thought about it. A lot. But I didn't want everything to rot into rage. I didn't want to carry that weight, to let it calcify into bitterness. So I did something harder. I drew lines. Strict, silent, immovable lines. No money talk. No access to my accounts. No inquiries into my home, my work, my savings. No manipulation disguised as concern. If they wanted to speak to me, they'd have to meet me where I am now, not where I used to be. That's when the postcard came. Light blue. Tidy handwriting I knew instantly. My mother's. It said, "We'd love to see the new house sometime. Just tea. No expectations. No apology. No accountability. Just a quiet attempt to slip back into my life through the side door." I didn't respond. I didn't rip it up either. I placed it in the drawer beneath our oven, where I keep things I'm not ready to throw away, but that no longer belong out in the open. Natalie found it later that week while reorganizing. She didn't say anything. Just slipped it back where I'd left it. That night, as we folded laundry, she asked, if they ever changed, really changed, would you let them in again? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, I didn't lock the door. I folded another towel. I just took away their key. And that answer gave me more peace than anything they'd ever offered me in their lives. Weeks passed. Then months. The story faded from public headlines, replaced by new scandals, new outrages. But for me, the aftermath unfolded in slow, quiet ripples. One of those ripples came in the form of a letter. Not an email. Not a text. But a printed, handwritten letter, thick cardstock, expensive penmanship. The return address was typed, but I knew immediately it was from my father. It began without greeting. I understand if this letter goes unread. I deserve that. No excuses. No manipulation. No for your own good. Just a string of words that, if genuine, was the closest thing to remorse he'd ever written. When I installed that software, I didn't just violate your privacy. I betrayed something sacred. I thought I was protecting you from bad decisions. I now realize I was only protecting my illusion of control. There were no promises to do better. No tearful apologies begging for contact. Just a single admission. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I just want you to know that I hear you now. And I will not interfere again. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. But something uncoiled quietly in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not healing. But release. Like a string tied too tightly finally loosened. I folded the letter and placed it next to the postcard, in that same drawer under the oven, my museum of boundary lines. That week, I hosted another digital boundaries session. This time at a local high school auditorium. Over 100 attendees, young adults, teachers, even a few parents sitting awkwardly in the back. We covered the basics, spotting device trackers, app permissions, account protection. But then one girl, maybe 16, raised her hand and asked in a trembling voice, "What if the person watching you says it's because they love you?" The room went still. I stepped away from the projector. Looked directly at her. "Then that's not love," I said. "It's control dressed in affection. Love doesn't need a password. It doesn't demand surveillance. It doesn't tell you who you're allowed to be." Her eyes welled up. She nodded silently. And I knew that no legal verdict, no settlement, no dollar amount would ever feel as important as that moment. After the session, Natalie met me in the hallway. She had stayed in the back, as always, observing, never hovering. She gave me a small nod. "You're really doing it," she said. "You're turning every wound into armor, for other people." I leaned into her and whispered, because I never had anyone like this when I needed it. We walked out into the warm night together. At home, things found a rhythm. We fixed the sink, finally replaced the slanted porch railing, and painted the living room walls a soft sage green. Natalie 3D printed new shelf brackets that looked like ivy vines. I installed a hidden safe under the stairs for our important documents. And on the first Sunday of every month, we held silent coffee mornings. No phones. No talking. Just music, sunlight, and the sacred sound of being left alone on our own terms. Landon started showing up more often, too. He'd bring over frozen dumplings and talk about his classes, his thesis on economic autonomy, his plans to start a non-profit one day for young adults aging out of abusive households. He was growing into someone steady, rooted, someone who no longer needed our parents' approval to feel worthy. One night over dinner, he said, "You think they ever really saw who we were?" I shook my head. They saw who they needed us to be to stay in control. He didn't argue. Just sipped his drink and said, "I'm glad we don't live there anymore." It wasn't until spring that another unexpected twist arrived. Miranda, my attorney, called and told me the district attorney had officially opened a criminal investigation into the spyware incident. Not just as a civil case, but under state statutes related to computer crimes and wire fraud. "Do you want to press it forward?" she asked me. "It's your choice." I thought about it for 2 days. Then I called her back. "No. I don't need them prosecuted. Not anymore." "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said. "The damage is done. And the boundaries are built. There's nothing left in that well." She respected my choice. And that was the moment I knew I had truly moved on. Because justice doesn't always have to end in punishment. Sometimes, justice is just choosing not to let someone have another inch of your time, your space, or your power. That summer, Natalie and I began planning something we'd been quietly circling for a while: our wedding. Not a spectacle. Not a 200-person event with silver towers of hors d'oeuvres and camera crews. Just us. And a few people who knew the whole story and stayed anyway. We held the ceremony in our backyard under the same maple tree where we'd once sat with pizza boxes and dreams. Landon officiated. Natalie wore an ivory silk suit. I wore a pale blue lace dress that caught the wind just enough to make me feel like I could fly. There were no speeches from parents. No toasts from people who hadn't earned the right to be present. Just quiet music, a homemade cake, and a love so soft it didn't need performance. As we danced on the grass, Natalie whispered in my ear, "From now on, no one gets to pause the life you're living." And I realized, this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the start of one I got to write without anyone else's pen. I never thought peace could be loud. But it is. It hums in the morning coffee machine. It vibrates in the creak of wood floors under warm socks. It echoes in the sound of keys dropped on a kitchen counter by someone who loves you, not because they made you, but because they chose to stay. After the wedding, things didn't get perfect. Natalie and I still bickered about grocery budgets and which spice rack actually worked best. Landon still texted memes at 2 a.m. We still had student loans, cracked tiles, and unfinished shelves. But it was ours. Every inch of it. And I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. 3 weeks after we returned from a small weekend trip to Cape May, I got an email from a women's shelter director in Jersey City. She had read a blog post I wrote for Veritas titled "When Your First Spy is Family" and asked if I'd be willing to run a workshop for her residents, women who had fled controlling households, many still trying to protect their online identities from the people they had once called home. I agreed immediately. That workshop changed me more than anything else I had done. These women weren't just survivors of physical control, they were survivors of financial surveillance, phone monitoring, fake location apps installed on their kids' tablets. They weren't afraid of hackers. They were afraid of their ex-husbands. Their mothers. Their sons. They weren't just protecting their money. They were fighting to reclaim the right to think, to breathe, to be. I stayed 3 hours longer than I was scheduled. Some cried. Some sat in silent awe. One just said, "I didn't know I was allowed to want space." That night, when I got home, I sat on our porch and watched the streetlights flicker. Natalie joined me, handing me a mug of sleepy-time tea, and I said, "They don't want war. They want a corner of the world where they're not being watched." She nodded. "Like you did." I looked at her. "Like I still do." In the following months, digital boundaries grew. We partnered with local shelters, LGBTQ+ youth centers, and even a few halfway homes. We created starter kits, simple privacy checklists, budget sheets, QR codes for hidden resources, tools for people who'd never learned how to protect themselves online because no one ever taught them that privacy was a right, not a privilege. Landon got accepted into a competitive MBA program and started researching non-profit models for survivors of familial abuse. He texted me one day, thinking of calling it First Light. You know, for the first moment people realize they deserve better. I sent back, that's exactly what it feels like. As the seasons passed, so did the messages from my parents. They still trickled in from time to time, mostly cards, polite invitations, quiet reminders that they existed. They never apologized out loud. But they stopped pretending they had power. They stopped asking for access. They stopped assuming they'd be let back in. The most recent card came in the spring. My mother's writing, still tight and graceful. We hope you're doing well. If ever there's a time you want to talk, the door is open. No pressure. I read it once. Then slipped it into the drawer, where the others lived. Natalie asked me that night, did you ever wish they changed more? I thought for a moment. No, I said. I just wish I hadn't spent so many years trying to become someone they could love without controlling. And then I added, but that girl I used to be, she got out. She saved every cent. She hid her notebooks. She wrote code in the dark. She survived long enough for me to come find her. She reached across the table and took my hand. You didn't just find her. You gave her a future. That weekend, I received a hand-drawn thank you card from a teenage girl who had attended one of my workshops. It was simple. A stick figure standing in a square with the words "My Space" written above. Inside, it said, "You made me feel like I was allowed to want something of my own. Thank you for giving me that." I placed the card on the wall above my desk. And I cried. Because in the end, that's what this was about. Not revenge. Not even justice. But space. The right to draw a line. The courage to say no. The freedom to love without permission. And the power to rebuild something soft, strong, and entirely mine. So now, when people ask me, what happened with your parents? Did you ever forgive them? I say this. Forgiveness isn't a bridge you build for the people who hurt you. It's the door you close behind you when you walk into a life that no longer includes them. And sometimes, the greatest act of forgiveness is leaving someone outside. Forever. Sophia's story, like so many others, proves that not everyone born into your life deserves a lifelong seat at your table. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most determined to keep you under control. But strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's measured in spreadsheets, in coded boundaries, in choosing not to answer a letter. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about stolen autonomy. And taking it back. So what do you think of Sophia's choice? Her courage? Her boundaries? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget, on this channel, Revenge Echoes, we tell the stories that others try to bury. Subscribe, share, and stay with us for more true-to-life tales of justice, betrayal, and rebirth.